So I was leaked earlier in the week by a Spanish newspaper the proposed World Tour for the UCI cycling big races coming up at the end of the year, all crammed into 4 months. Today's video is going to be all about the breakdown of some of those clashes and what's going on with that proposed plan and taking you through it. But then also we're going to talk about the sports science behind managing some of the riders' loads throughout that time. Obviously, it is a bit of a different circumstance, so it makes for a really interesting discussion around fatigue, recovery, preparing for races, etc. So without any further ado, let's get stuck into it and talk about the 2020 or possible 2020 UCI World Tour. Hey guys, Nick here. Welcome back to the channel talking science of endurance and sports science in general. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button down below to keep following on for some of the content discussing science of endurance and how you can improve your endurance performance overall, but also what's happening behind it, the why behind what we do. Today, as I said in the intro, I'm talking about the proposed schedule for the UCI World Tour, so the cycling tour, all the grand tours, the Vuelta, the Giro, and the Tour de France. How is it all going to work over the next little while? Early in the week, and I found this on Cycling Pulse on Facebook, was a leaked proposal through a Spanish newspaper of the World Tour plan. And I'm going to throw up on the screen now. And what you can see here is they've mapped out pretty much all the key races that are going to be occurring for the rest of the year leading into November. There's nothing planned for December, obviously a little bit of a break before heading back into what would look like the 2021 season, kicking off with things like the Tour Down Under, etc. So if we have a look here, everything's sort of interestingly laid out. You can see the Grand Tours, the Tour de France, the Vuelta, and the Giro in the big colours there, and then all the smaller tours and the one day, the classics that are going to be going ahead are all in. You'll notice there are a few keys. Obviously, Paris-Roubaix still there. Tour de Dauphiné is also there as well. They're probably the two, when I say big minor races, if that makes sense. They're still going to be there. We've obviously got a couple of national championships by the looks of things as well. So plenty of racing still coming up for our professional riders. But what is interesting is you can see here, and I apologise for the entire thing being in Spanish, but like I said, it was leaked through a Spanish newspaper. But what you can see here is we've got couple of lead-in races, like I said, some of those smaller tours, a couple of one-day stage races, but then we've got the Tour de France straight away, and it's sort of all crammed into this 4-month period, which makes a really interesting time for cycling and professional cyclists managing load, coming out of a period where there's been essentially no racing unless you've been doing virtual racing, which depends on your team. Probably some riders have been doing that, some riders haven't. But then we're going to go straight back in and hit 3 grand tours straight away. There's a big jump in what riders have been able to do at the moment, particularly riders who've been based in things like Spain and Italy who haven't been able to necessarily go out and ride. Maybe they're stuck on trainers the entire time. It's going to be a really big jump to be able to step back up to World Tour level, riding in groups, etc. So what I'm going to do is go and break down some of the key parts of this plan now, and I want to bring back up on the screen the really big one for me is obviously the Tour de France is the biggest race of the year for all professional riders. And what we've really got here is if this plan does go ahead, we're going to end up with only a couple of months to lead into the Tour de France off pretty much nothing. There's only 2 one-day classics. There's only 2 sort of shorter tours to lead in. So it'll be really interesting how teams balance their riders and the structure of their riders, who the leaders are for this season. Given that there isn't much racing leading to the Tour de France, it's going to be interesting to see who has the form and who doesn't. Typically, where you might have a rider go and do some of the other tours, or you might have a rider go and do like the Giro, for example, before they go into the Tour de France as a bit of a warm-up race. Not going to have the opportunity to do that now. They're going to have to get their form really, really quick. And even then, we can see there's 2 very, very close races. So it's not even like you can get a chance at racing both of those. In terms of the shorter 1 week races, probably going to have to pick between. Some riders I'm sure will go across between, but I don't reckon any of the team leaders will be racing both of those. I reckon they'll pick one and then sort of lead in. So an interesting strategy on do you want to push the training through and wait for Dauphiné and have a shorter break between then when the Tour de France starts, or do you want to do the earlier racing, try and get done? A rider's going to want to be picking and choosing maybe one of those single stage or single day classics as well. Then we lead into the Tour de France. So off a relatively short preparation, this is the interesting one from a load management perspective, is that we've got riders who haven't probably really done a massive amount. They're obviously still training, and cycling's probably been lucky in that regard that you can still train indoors and do all that. But compared to what they would normally do from a volume perspective getting out into the climbs, some riders are going to have a big advantage there, with some countries not being completely shut down. Like I know here, some of the Australian riders who would have potentially come home would have been able to go out and ride still, which is a big bonus, and they're able to accumulate those big Ks out on the bike on the road. Whereas potentially some of the athletes in Spain, Italy, and those European countries that have been struggling a lot more given the current situation, maybe haven't been able to get out and accumulate that much on climbs, and maybe a bit more restricted to a trainer-based set of sessions, which is really going to impact their ability when they do get out onto those climbs as well. Looking at them moving through, we then get back to this middle part of back into September where we've just finished the Tour de France, and then October we've got this overlap between the Giro and the Vuelta, and I think this is where tactically it's going to be really interesting for a lot of teams. Who are they going to put forward as their A rider, not just for the Tour de France, but then for the Giro and the Vuelta, and how they're going to balance both of those with a week of overlap. It'd be interesting to see whether teams, and I don't know if this is something that they're allowed to do or able to do, but whether teams start the Giro with a really strong group, maybe throughout the Giro, a leader crashes and they're no longer in contention for the race. Do they deliberately drop riders, get them to pull out of the race so that they can go quickly fly over to the Vuelta and just continue racing from there? Is that something that might come into it? I don't know. Tactically, that might be an interesting way of sort of getting through that first week of the Vuelta a little bit stronger and maybe asserting some dominance over the race. A team's going to look at maybe some younger riders to bring through and go, all right, we're going to really attack the Giro, but the Vuelta coming second, maybe we can put a younger rider in there as a leader and see how they grow and develop. We might get some weaker fields in both of them because depending on which team wants to target which race, you might have a bit of an even split. It's going to be a really interesting back half of the season, but also what we've got is we've got a lot of racing crammed into that second half. And you can see here, it's basically covered. We've got things like obviously Paris-Roubaix is then aligned with the Vuelta as well. So are there going to be riders wanting to ride the Classic as opposed to riding a full tour? Are they going to pull out partway through? You can see obviously it's in the back end, that sort of last week of the Vuelta. Are they going to pull out at the end there just so that they can go ride Paris-Roubaix? Is that going to be a tactical thing for teams as well? So sponsorships, obviously we talk about in cycling a lot. Teams will get it in the break just so they can get the sponsors on TV and things like that. Is it going to be an interesting tactic that they play? Obviously, if it's a weaker field in Paris-Roubaix because everyone's racing the Vuelta, maybe are they going to go there? Or is it going to be the opposite? Is no one going to want to race the Grand Tour at the end because they see the potential of, well, it's just going to burn our riders out? And that's where I guess the sports science comes into it, is performance staff are going to have to be really careful about managing rider load, given that some riders will go through, some of the support riders absolutely will potentially go through and ride maybe 3 Grand Tours in the year, or at least 2 of those Grand Tours in the year usually. Are they still going to be able to do the same given that those Grand Tours are happening essentially a month apart? And in this circumstance here, we've only really got, if you look at the Tour de France, there's only probably a week or so. Look at the dates there. We've only got really a week and a bit until we lead into the Giro. And as I said, the Giro and Vuelta overlap. So riders who would typically be able to manage load of doing 2 tours in the year and then some small racing probably aren't going to be able to do that unless they do maybe the Tour and the Vuelta. But if that's not in line with the team's strategy, is that going to cause some issues with some riders having to do too much work or maybe even not enough? And this is going the other end of the spectrum, is maybe some riders are going to get pushed out and not race as much this year. That might cause some movement in teams for 2021. But what it may also do is actually underload those athletes so that when they do race, they might be at more risk of an injury from a training load spike, from an acute training load or acute racing load, if you like, when they do have to be called up to race maybe last minute. Maybe they're not fully prepared and we might actually see some inhibited racing as a result from a physiological perspective. Even regardless of that, leading into like the Tour de France, I'm sure most of the athletes that are elite athletes are going to be amazing anyway, but it's going to be interesting to see what are they doing to prepare off potentially a fairly low base for most of them. Are we going to see it is more so weighted? We've seen previous tours where the time trial has been a really big impact from an individual perspective. Maybe the team time trial is going to play a bit more weight in the tour this year. Is it going to be the climbs like we saw with last year? Are we going to see one big climb that is going to really break the field completely and put big time gaps on athletes purely from the fact that they haven't been able to go and train these big climbs in the lead up, or have very minimal practice on the big climbs in the lead up depending on their circumstance? Are we going to see that's the part of the tour that's going to break? Like I said before, underloading and overloading is definitely a really key concern, particularly from a burnout perspective. I think that's going to be the biggest one for a lot of the riders. Will they be able to then transition off the back of a really heavy race season? A lot of support riders in particular, will they be able to track off the back of a heavy race season in September, October, November? lot of racing, and then come back around into the following year and be expected to then work and train and get better for then the 2021 season. And how is that 2021 season going to be impacted? Are they going to delay races as a result of having a big cram load here? Be an interesting decision from the UCI on that. But from an internal team perspective, I'd definitely be sort of thinking that most sports science staff in those teams are going to be looking at really balancing their team as best they can, using as much of their resources as they can from a rider availability, so that they can pick and choose when they need to, from a obviously tactical perspective and racing perspective, but also just managing load. I mean, there's not going to be a single rider who can ride all 3 tours this year. That's a fact. Unless, of course, like I said before, they drop out of the Giro early and race the Vuelta. But it's also the type of thing that racing one Grand Tour is hard enough, even for the elite level. It's hard enough. You look how exhausted they are by the end of the couple of weeks. Going in and then only having maybe a 10-day break and then going into another Grand Tour is going to be an extreme challenge. It's going to be interesting to see which riders will actually get through that period, will be able to do it, or if riders are just unable to do it and we actually see some riders dropping out towards the back of their second tour or the back of the third tour potentially, as a result of just fatigue and they're unable to keep up. A bit of speculation going on around if this is actually going to be the structure, but it seems like a bit of a I guess unknown at the moment, and it's the type of thing that really, to be able to get all of the Grand Tours done this year, this probably is the only way that you can do it, is have a bit of overlap. Obviously, I've tried to keep the Tour de France separate. Giro and Vuelta not as important, but still important races nonetheless. We might see some new talent emerge, which would be really good from, I guess, if we're looking sports science-wise at talent identification. It's going to be really good to see some of these potentially younger riders get a bit more of an opportunity to lead teams and work at the front of the field throughout races and challenge for the leaders' jerseys. Even from a sprinting perspective, from King of the Mountain perspective, we might actually see that, because a lot of the older riders may not be able to handle this sort of schedule in terms of being able to ride multiple tours in the space of 2 months. Maybe some of these younger riders will come in and fill those spots for the second tour, so allowing those other riders to do a bit more of a recovery sort of period. If we touch on recovery quickly, like I said, there's not much time between, so they're going to be doing probably very minimal between Tour de France and Giro if they are racing that. If they are racing Tour de France and Vuelta, maybe they might do 1 or 2 of these sort of single day stage races, like Tour de Flanders, for example. But it's the type of thing that they're probably going to be doing minimal between Tour de France and Giro, given there's only sort of 10 days. And it's almost used as like a maintenance taper period. They're not really going to be building anything. So if we come right back to the start, really this time now is probably the most critical for most of these cyclists in building their foundation. Obviously, they're going to be reasonably fit as it is, but the earlier they can get out based on when their restrictions lift in the places that they live and train, etc., where the team's based, as soon as they're able to get out and do more riding, that's going to be really advantageous. So it'll be interesting to see when teams are able to do that, and do we actually see, based on where teams are located in the world and where they choose to have their training camps, etc., where their riders are from, are we going to see some differences in team tactics based on the fact that they were able to get out earlier? So maybe they're going to be more aggressive at the beginning of the tour to really burn some of the other teams apart, so that the back end's a lot more comfortable. Are we going to see some teams sort of take the first week of the tour really, really easy, so that they can sort of ease into racing again, and then we see a really aggressive final week? Who knows? It's going to be a really interesting time for cycling and performance overall, and endurance performance in general. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. I know it's a bit sort of like here and there, but there is a lot of speculation, and I just want to throw some of my thoughts around this proposed World Tour plan for 2020. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think is going to happen with the World Tour this year? Who do you think is going to take advantage of this type of schedule? Are there any riders that you're looking for in particular? I know teams like Ineos are still going to be strong in this season to find a way to be smart about the scheduling and really prepare their riders, or multiple riders, to be completely ready to go when they need to be. And if anything, they've got plan A, B, C, D, E that they can still take the tour. Who do you think is going to take out some of the grand races? Who's going to take out some of the smaller ones? What would you do if you were in charge of a team? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Keen to hear them and talk about it a bit further. Other than that, thanks for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button before you do finish up. But otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.